Welcome to the Power Factor Show. Episode 162.
Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgson Powders, and JPL Precision.
So here's another course of fire. This one is called Mi Casa no es su casa. And I'm sure we'll get a translation on the screen here of what that says. Our scenario is you're watching TV when the loud crash of your front door being smashed in and the screams of your wife and children break your concentration. I hate it when I'm sitting there watching Oprah and I hear that crash out at the front door and it breaks my concentration. I mean, that's a bad evening. That's a bad start for the evening right there. You jump up and grab your gun off a nearby table just as one of the invaders comes through the doorway. You must stop the bad guys and save your family. This is course of fire, 10 runs minimum, Vickers scoring. We've got 5 threat targets, 2 scoring hits on each. And I'll make a note just for the stage designer who submitted these. It does not say on here in these procedures anywhere that it's Vickers scoring, and it also doesn't say how many scored hits per target. Now you can do the math. There's 10 rounds minimum, and there's 5 targets in the diagram. So obviously that's best 2 per target. But it should probably be spelled out on there. 5 IDPA targets, Vickers scoring best 2 per target, 10 round minimum. Start position, you are again seated. This time now it's supposed to be in your living room. At position A, hands on knees. Loaded, uncocked firearm on barrel at position B. So that would be like simulating your coffee table or something on the other side of the room. At buzzer, retrieve firearm, rack slide, and engage T1 with 2 rounds while moving to position C. From around the right side of cover, engage T2 and T3 with 2 rounds each, using tactical priority, slicing the pie. Move to position D, perform a tactical reload before engaging T4 and T5 with 2 rounds each from on the right side using tactical priority. Don't hit the wife and kids, simulated with non-threat targets. Now this is kind of an interesting stage. We got this, it was submitted to the show when the old rule book was still in effect prior to October of 2013. And so there's kind of some interesting wrinkles, changes that I wouldn't have thought about much until the new rule book came into effect. And it really affects how you approach this course of fire. Now one of the things, just to get back to kind of the basics, the start position is loaded and the gun is uncocked. A lot of modern guns, you can't uncock them when they're loaded. Any of the striker fired pistols, when you rack the slide to load the gun, the mechanism is at least partially cocked and you can't uncock it. Something like a 1911, obviously you can lower the hammer, but I would say loaded or half loaded, empty chamber, loaded magazine in the gun, empty chamber or something like that, or just get rid of this uncocked part of it. I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. I would just say normal ready position or unloaded. Again, move to position D, perform a tactical reload before engaging. You can't dictate a reload like that on the clock in a scenario course of fire, so I just leave that part of it out. But the other thing is, with the new rules that say cover extends to infinity, now that means a line that's drawn through the center of the down zero of the threat target, past the edge of the cover position, and then extending to infinity. And so the idea that a cover position is something that you move to has kind of gone out the window. I think for a lot of clubs already, anytime there's downrange movement, you can dictate which edge is to be used as cover to engage a given target, but you can't dictate that the competitor go to that cover position by telling them to do so. Now on this course of fire, we've got the position B where you pick up the gun, position C from which 2 targets are to be engaged, or cover position C, and then cover position D. And the new rule book essentially establishes cover positions and shooting positions as 2 different things. I mean, they're related, but you can't say, standing within arm's length of the left side of this wall B is the shooting position for this target. You can tell me I have to use this cover while engaging, but you can't dictate by just telling me to do so that I have to approach the wall to engage the target. Now, you can compel somebody to get close to the wall by putting up some kind of an obstacle. That means unless I'm within 5 feet of the wall, I can't see the target. I have to go around on the downrange side of this obstacle to get in position to engage the target. So you can still, to a certain extent, direct the shooters to where you want them to go. But if you don't put in those obstacles and you don't create certain kind of constraints on the shooter's movement, they don't have to go to anything. They just have to use that vertical edge. And this is an interesting example on this course of fire, because if I were shooting this, I often shoot CDP. I mean, for many years, custom defensive pistol was the only division I shot. And so I'm really accustomed to engaging targets starting with 9 rounds in the gun and having 8 rounds in a reload. Now, if you look at this course of fire in what I would call kind of the conventional pre-October 2013 way to engage the targets, you would pick up your gun at B, and while you're moving towards C, this is one of these situations where since the targets are downrange, you are going to be moving towards C after you pick up the gun, because the only way you're going to get to where you're going is by going towards C. So you're going to go that way whether you're told to or not. Now, the cover position C has 2 sides to it, and you're told to engage around the right side. Now, when I arrive at the right side of position C, I can pie around, engage T3, then engage T2, then I'll advance to D, and around the right side, engage T5, and then T4. One of the things I would do, just as a side note, is switch the numbering of those last 2 targets. Since you're going to be engaging around the right side of the cover, the target on the right should be T4 and the target on the left should be T5, just to reinforce in the mind of the competitor that you've got, if you're shooting around the right side, you have to engage the right target first. And so by numbering the targets in the order in which you're engaging them makes it a little easier to follow. The same situation with T2 and T3. You're going to be pieing around the right side of cover at C, switch the numbering on those targets so that their numbering is in the same order in which they're going to be engaged. So then when I get down to the cover of D, if I'm shooting them in custom defensive pistol division, when I arrive there, I've got 3 rounds in my gun because I put 2 rounds on T1, 2 on T2, 2 on T3, arrive at cover, I'll put 2 on T5, 1 on T4, I'll perform my slide lock reload, and then put the 10th round on T4 to complete the course of fire. Now, under the old rule book, an alternative that you would have seen at a lot of clubs, depending on the space between C and D, is rather than carry 3 rounds with me down to D, where I'm going to need 4 rounds to complete the engagement, I would reload while moving between C and D. I would do it since I've got rounds in the gun still after I've completed the engagement of T3. I'll do a tactical reload or reload with retention while I move to D, so that when I arrive, my gun is fully stoked, and I'll use that travel time to do my reload, complete the engagement, fire 2 and 2 on T4 and T5, end of course of fire. Now, under the new rules, I cannot advance and reload. I cannot advance from C to D. Now, the thinking prior was that because while I'm moving from C to D, D is covering me from T4 and T5, I'm not actually leaving cover. That cover actually extends from position C to position D. So even though I'm leaving the position from which I engaged T2 and T3, I'm not technically leaving cover because I'm still covered by D as I advance towards it. Well, the new rules turn that around and dictate that if you are going to reload between the engagement of T3 and the engagement of the targets in the last array, you must do it while you're at position C. You cannot leave and reload. You can't leave that position with an empty gun. You've got to reload before you go. So the tactical, if I can introduce that word into a discussion of a shooting sport, the tactical thinking of the competitor that used to say, you know, I can save some time by moving and reloading, that choice has gone out the window. You're not going to be able to advance and reload. So in this case, after you've fired 2 at T1, 2 at T2, 2 at T3, you're compelled to carry whatever rounds you have left in your gun as you move toward D. Now, all of this discussion has been kind of this scenario of moving from B to C and then from C to D, moving downrange towards the targets, shortening the distance as you're engaging them, but moving essentially as far as you have to. I mean, the maximum distance that you have to travel from each position is approaching, say, within arm's length of the cover. Now, you don't have to, because the cover extends to infinity. As long as I'm using the right edge of C and the right edge of D as my cover, I don't have to get anywhere near them. So my alternate approach to engaging these targets is, instead of moving kind of downrange at a sharp diagonal, I would say you can move in a much shallower angle, more laterally than downrange, and not have to travel as far. You don't cover as much distance on foot to see and engage those targets. So the alternate scenario is, now again, something that we've talked about on the show in the past, is trying to decide in advance how you're going to attack a course of fire based on what you see in the written diagram and the procedure is often not going to be of much value. You can sit here and look at this thing and go, oh, I'm going to engage this one, and then I'm going to engage this one, and then I take a step to the right and I'll be able to see that. And then when you see it set up, you'll see that the target that you think is directly downrange is actually 15 feet over to one side behind something else. And so kind of scheming and creating this game plan before you've actually seen it set up isn't of much value. But just in the kind of the theory of how to approach this course of fire, if you look at the way it's set up in the drawing, you can move at a kind of a shallow angle from B in the direction of C, stopping essentially directly uprange of the letter C as it appears in the drawing, and engage T3 from that position. Then if you take another step to your right, you can see both T2 and T5. Now here's a situation where, depending on the location of D, you could conceivably be standing way back at C, look past the edge of D to engage T5. You don't have to run down towards D to get at T5, but you must use the right edge of D as cover. And that's one of the things you have to kind of scope this out and take a look at it and say, okay, looking at this drawing, it looks like if I'm standing kind of just to the right of the letter C at that barricade, I can engage both T2 and T5. But you see you've got this non-threat that's between D and T5 that very possibly is put in that location precisely to prevent you from engaging T5 from C and forcing you to move from that position. So if you can't engage T5 from near C, you can keep advancing on a straight line that doesn't really take you toward position D. It takes you kind of out towards, what I would call stage left. You're kind of on a laterally more in line with T1, standing way out to the right so that you can get at T4. You're nowhere near D. You haven't gone to D, but you're in a position to engage T4 using the right edge of D as cover. So if you take a ruler and lay it out on the page, the scenario that I described in the first case, where I get up from my start position, grab the gun at B, move to C, engage, move to D, and engage. You're covering more ground than if you just move along a straight line that leaves you, after your last shot has been fired, kind of laterally in alignment with T1 far out to the right side of the course of fire as it's drawn out here, but you probably have covered, depending on how big this course of fire is, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 steps that you've saved by moving on a straight line at a shallower angle rather than going downrange. And your skill set will have something to do with how you decide to approach this. If you're a very accurate shooter, but you're not very quick on your feet, you'll probably want to use the second approach where you don't cover as much ground, but your target is further away. If you're fast on your feet, you're a little bit more of a run and gunner, you'll probably want to get closer to the targets, use your foot speed to get closer to make easier shots. But it's just two different ways to look at the course of fire, and it's a way that I wouldn't have looked at this course of fire until the new rule book came out. Hey, Power Factor fans, I'm Rick. And kind of as we're kind of sorting through some of the new rules, new IDPA rules, and the effect that it has on how you approach courses of fire, one of the things that's come up is it used to be, I believed, at times, if you were shooting an ESP or SSP, you were actually better off loading 9+1 than the maximum allowed of 10+1. And my reasoning was that because you could not dump an extra round, and that most courses of fire consisted of paper targets that were to be engaged 2 each, that 11th round sometimes created a disadvantage in where and when you reloaded. For instance, you maybe would fire 10 rounds and then have to carry that 11th round to the next position, where you'd fire 1, reload, and then have to put another round on the same target again, which is something you want to try to minimize. When I was shooting, I shot ESP for an entire year using a single stack 38 Super with 9-round mags. And I became convinced that loading 9+1 and having an even number of rounds in the gun was beneficial more often than not, because it allowed me to reload between targets. I'd go 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. I'd have my 10 rounds. I would be reloading between targets rather than finding myself in a situation where I've got this one round that I've got to get rid of somewhere. Now, some people consider that extra round to be a good idea to have. You can pick up a mic. Maybe, you hit a popper on the edge and it didn't go down, so you want that extra round available to you. But I really rarely found it to be of that much value. It was more than balanced by, I believed, having an even number of rounds that allowed me to reload between targets. I rarely fire any extra shots. That's another consideration. I was watching a video on YouTube of 3 guys who proclaimed to be master class shooters that apparently travel around the country shooting sanctioned matches. And these guys were firing, I would say, an average of 3 or 4 extra shots per stage. They were engaging 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And I couldn't figure out what they were doing. It didn't really look like round dumping. They were triple tapping rather than double tapping, so it didn't look like a situation where they were evaluating their hits and then putting an extra shot on the target. They were just firing a lot more rounds than necessary. I'll typically fire, let's say in a 70 to 90 round match, I might shoot only 2 or 3 extra rounds above the minimum required for the whole match. And so having an extra round really just doesn't play out very well, or it didn't historically. Now, the new rule book came out in October of 2013, gets rid of round dumping. So what effect does that have? It used to be one of the reasons you had to carry that 11th round with you if you were shooting an ESP or SSP is because you didn't want to run afoul of the round dumping rule by putting that on a target that didn't really maybe need it in order to get you to slide lock. So that was the advantage that I was trying to play with having only 10 rounds in the gun, was not having this 11th round that I might want to get rid of. I don't have to worry about round dumping. With the new rule book, there is no round dumping. You can literally, like Vickers' scoring always said, you can fire as many rounds as you need or want to fulfill the minimum requirements. So I believe now there's absolutely no advantage to having fewer than the maximum number of rounds allowed. So for instance, if I were to go back to shooting ESP with my 38 Super, I would get a belt full of 10-round magazines and load 10+1, because now you've got situations where you can use that 11th round to your advantage. You've got it like a joker in your pocket there that you can pull out whenever you need it. Whereas prior, this kind of fear of round dumping was always there, that, God, what am I going to do with this extra round? Whereas now you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, you can fire 3 rounds at any target that requires 2 rounds. You could, just use it, keep it as an extra spare whenever you need it. And if you don't need it, fire it at a target that doesn't need it, just to get it out of the gun. So I would say if you're ever in the situation of trying to decide, do I want to use 8, let's say in my single stack 45, if I'm shooting in CDP, do I want to shoot 8-round mags and load 8+1? Do I want to use 7-round mags and load 7+1? It used to be, I would have argued in favor of loading 9+1, and if your magazines only hold 9 rounds, you're allowed to load 9+1. I would have advised, if you're the kind of a shooter that shoots close to the minimum number of rounds, you don't take a lot of extra shots, you're probably going to get a benefit from loading 9+1. I shot an entire season loading 7+1 in CDP, and I never found that to be an advantage. The idea that I was short a round or 2 came up a lot more often. And when I say short a round or 2, meaning I would have to do a second reload when other people were doing a single reload. So people that had loaded 8+1 were getting through the course of fire with 1 reload or 2 reloads. Me loaded 7+1, I would need 2 reloads or 3 reloads. And so it was just, and especially when you're talking about IDPA as a sport, when you're only carrying 2 reloads on your belt, you're spending too much time trying to conserve ammo if you're only loaded 7+1. So I never thought that was practical. But under the new rule books, I'd say there's no reason not to load to the maximum allowed capacity of 10+1 in ESP and SSP and 8+1 in CDP.
All right, the trivia question this week is a USPSA question, and it goes like this. Can you put grip tape on the slide of your handgun in production division of USPSA? Is it legal? Yes or no? Send us the response to our email address, powerfactorshow@gmail.com, and your response shall be legal or illegal to put grip tape on your slide in production division of USPSA. Should be a simple question. Check out your most current 2010 rule book to find the answer, and there's prizes attached to these trivia questions, of course, so good luck to all the participants. We will accept answers for 1 week after this episode airs, and 1 week later when the next episode posts, we will close the entries for this trivia question. So we'll take all the correct answers and randomly select a winner to win things like Ben Stager's book, Taylor Freelance products, hats from Northwest Safe. We've got some gift certificates to give away. We've got a lot of things from supporters for the show, and we thank all of them. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.